Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, providing education and life skills solutions designed to empower individuals and the families of those with complex disabilities. Mary Cariola Center, transforming lives of people with disabilities. More at marycariola.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made on Friday when former President Joe Biden was officially diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer. Doctors say the cancer has spread to his bones. He will begin treatment, and the announcement has prompted an outpouring of prayers and support. And yet for the Democratic Party, they have been mired in a Biden news cycle seemingly all spring. A new book, co-authored by CNN anchor Jake Tapper, details the ways that White House staff tried to conceal Biden's cognitive decline from the public. The actor George Clooney is one of the few on-the-record sources to use his name. Clooney was a years-long Biden supporter who pulled his support after meeting with Biden early in the campaign. Clooney said that Biden no longer recognized him, and the actor wondered how Biden could even consider running again with such steep cognitive decline readily apparent. Eventually, Biden left the race, as you know, just about 100 days before voting began. One of Vice President Kamala Harris's top advisors told Jake Tapper for the book that Biden, and I'm euphemizing here, royally screwed the Democratic Party by holding on to power for so long. And now the question for Democrats is, who will lead? How can the party emerge after a second defeat to Donald Trump? Last week, before the cancer diagnosis, Biden went on The View and said that he still believes he would have beaten Trump a second time, despite the avalanche of data saying otherwise. And Biden said he wasn't surprised that Vice President Harris lost. Those comments sparked a wave of frustration among Democrats who want the spotlight somewhere else. They want to figure out a way to move forward and galvanize going into, well, 2026 and 2028. Joining us this hour are a couple of very, very smart voices on the scene in Democratic politics locally, and they're with me in studio. Nayeli Santiago, Vice President of Monroe County Young Democrats. Welcome back to the program. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me back.
Dylan Daylor is a Democratic political consultant. Welcome back to the program to you.
Nice to be back.
Nayeli, you were just in New York City for a big event?
Yes. So our executive board and our little posse of folks that we brought from Monroe County went down to New Rochelle for the New York State Young Democrats convention. And we rechartered earlier this year. We are putting Monroe back on the map. We got 2 caucus chairs elected, myself as the Hispanic Latino chair for the Monroe County New York State Young Dems Hispanic Caucus, and also Emily Goldsmith, one of our members, will be the Labor Caucus chair.
All right, so you've been very, very busy. Dylan, you spent time in Wisconsin pretty recently. You've been very busy. What were you doing in Wisconsin?
I was helping out the party with their mail program. I'm a little bit of a mail nerd, a little old school politicking.
Okay. As a relatively young Democrat, you're in the old school.
I'm in the old school of tactics sometimes, yeah, apparently.
Tactics. All right. We're not going to spend the entire hour on President Biden or Vice President Harris. We are going to try to look ahead, and we're not going to ask our guests this hour to predict who the nominee is going to be in 2028. That's kind of a fool's errand at this moment. It's more of a conversation about what kinds of politics is likely to galvanize a party and win elections, because there are many, many names that are, sort of in consideration to try to lead the party forward, whether that's as a presidential candidate or different roles. And they're not all the same style. I mean, the political left is not a monolith. It's pretty, like Nayeli is laughing. You can confirm that, right?
Oh, yeah. We're known as Big Tent for a reason. We're a melting pot. We're a reflection of the people. That's one of the things that our party really prides ourselves on, is that we try to bring in as many folks as possible to represent as many people as possible.
Well, I do want to start by at least listening to 2 clips that I think will make a pretty fair point, which is that in the wake of this book coming out, there is already this kind of wave of folks saying, well, Biden should never have run in 2020. That he was already in cognitive decline. If you listen to these 2 clips, you're not going to hear the same person. The first is from one of the 2020 presidential debates between Biden and Trump. Let's listen.
One of the big debates we had with 23 of my colleagues trying to win the nomination that I won were saying that Biden wanted to allow people to have private insurance still. They can. They do. They will under my proposal.
It's not what you've said,
But
and it's not what
that
your party has said.
That is simply
your party
a lie.
doesn't say it. Your party
That is
wants to
simple.
go socialist
My
medicine
party is
and
me.
socialist
Right
healthcare.
now, I am
and
the
they're going to
Democratic
dominate
Party.
you, Joe. You know that.
I am the Democratic Party right now. The platform of the
Not according
Democratic
to
Party
Harris.
is what I, in fact, approved of.
Okay, that's 2020. Now let's listen to the same two candidates on the stage 4 years later.
We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
That's tough. I mean, that's tough to hear. What do you hear there, Nialise?
The difference is stark. It's sad. The difference that's there. We really did need somebody to come out swinging, and he did not deliver in that way. When I look back at last year's election and what happened with him stepping down, I was nervous. Like, I came on here and I said, I don't know how
I don't know if we can do it in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure that we didn't do it in time. And we made a few wrong steps on the way. But I think that what should have happened, looking back, hindsight's 2020, we should have pulled the GOP move, and he should have stepped down so that we could let Harris, because she would have been the incumbent, if he was going to step down one way or
He
another.
should have stepped down as president. Is that what you're saying?
And let her run as an incumbent.
I see.
That's what they do all the time. That's how they are able to say, well, I should stay, keep this person, even though they may have just gotten there 2, 3, 6 months ago, because they stepped down to kind of pave the pathway for their candidates. That's what the GOP does. And so we could have taken a page out of their book there, which maybe would have set her up for a better run come November.
Not a perfect parallel, but similar in a way to what Justin Trudeau did in Canada. He leaves office. Mark Carney becomes the, quote, interim prime minister.
Yep.
And now Carney wins the election and he is the prime minister.
Yes.
Okay. Dylan Daler, what do you hear in those clips?
I remember I came on your show, you had me on, and you asked me about, will he drop will and who will replace him, or who would replace him in that case. I'm thinking back to that, and I just remember being so surprised because it was not consistent. We were not getting a consistent Biden at that point. We had some moments where we would watch him and we would be like, that is the man of 2020. But I think it's actually really interesting because if you watch Trump's debate performances in 2024, there were similar, like he looked very different than his 2020 self. And I think it's a good reminder that the presidency truly does age you faster. And Joe Biden, was already our oldest president at the time. And it's clear the 4 years of cleaning up COVID, of the inflation crisis, foreign policy issues, absolutely aged President Biden.
And there's no shame in that. The presidency, Barack Obama talked about, he jokes about, look at me on day one, look at me 8 years later. There's no shame in that. It's just that I think the questions were always fair on whether someone is cognitively sharp enough for the hardest job in the world, with the biggest responsibilities in the world. And we took some heat on this program when we held those conversations maybe earlier than a lot of others. I'm not going to say I was the first, but I mean, a lot of listeners did not like the programming that we were hosting, trying to ask those hard questions. And it was because it was increasingly clear as you got through 2022, 2023, that he was really aged by this or aged by a lot of what he was dealing with. That's not the shame. The question is, can anybody give up power willingly? I mean, Nialisa, what are the lessons of this campaign and maybe the Biden legacy now? How do you see the Biden legacy?
It's the way that they went about it. I agree. It was one of the reasons why I had the stance that I had when it was around the time that Biden, right after the debate that they had, there were times when we saw the Biden that we wanted, and then there was times that we didn't. And if you want the people on your side, you got to be real with them. And he will always be remembered by this now. It will cast a huge shadow on his legacy that he had. It's not going to be the way that he got us through COVID. It's not going to be the
Beating Trump his first run, right?
yeah, no, it's not, because beating Trump the first time doesn't matter when we're dealing with what we're dealing with right now. And he's in the White House right now dismantling democracy. Like 2020, congrats, you moved the goalpost to 4 more years later. But we still ended up here because of decisions that were made to cover up the way that he was declining. And it's a hard pill for people to swallow. And we as a party are going to have to answer for that.
No, in a strange way, I've heard from listeners who've sent me notes, Nilese, I wonder if you agree, who feel like the situation is actually worse right now than it would have been if Trump had beaten Biden the first time. That 8 years of President Trump would now be ended. Mike Pence would have remained. He was still on the ballot in 2020, wasn't? Boy, yeah. History moves fast, everybody. Really moves fast. So I don't know who the candidate would have been for president for the Republicans in 2024. Probably Ron DeSantis. I don't know for sure. But I've had listeners of this program who lean left who say we're in a worse spot now than we were 4 years ago. And 4 years ago, it was like this sense of relief among the left that, like, well, Trump is gone. Do you feel like in history, when you look back, you will say, boy, if Trump was going to win a second time, it would have been better had it happened in 2020?
It's hard to say. These last 4 years with him not being the president gave him more time to develop his relationship with Putin. Elon garnered a lot more power and influence here in the United States. And, he cozied up to Trump very quickly. I don't know when did the Heritage Foundation start putting together Project 2025? Did it start in January 2020 when they lost? Or did it start before that? Did they hit the ground running after the insurrection? Like, it's hard to say. It's the landscape now is hard to navigate. There are times when I sit here, I don't have a perfect understanding of how we got to this point. I'm young. I only have been involved for less than 10 years and paying attention much more recently. And so I'm still trying to wrap my head around how we got here and where the missteps were.
People older than you ain't got it figured out either. I hate to tell you this.
But, it's a possibility, but I think we'll be playing this what if for forever.
Dylan, what do you think the Biden legacy is now?
I think it's going to be a good reminder. I hope it's a legacy of learning for the Democrats. The Democrats realize that we need the younger generation of politicians stepping in now, that when we pass monumental bills like the Inflation Reduction Act, that the money needs to get out faster, that we need to take responsibility for the good things that we've done. We need to put our name on things and make it clear to voters that we really do have their best interests at heart. I think part of the problem was, when you looked at I don't think voters understood what Biden did necessarily, and the party does not have the off-year funding to be able to go out and tell voters, here's what we did. And by the time that we got to the election, you are so mired in trying to fight back against the attacks, a deluge of attacks by the Trump team, that you can't necessarily focus on your past victories.
So let me key in on the point that Dylan is making here. When you talk about getting the money out faster from the Inflation Reduction Act, listeners may remember this as one of the biggest bills ever passed, with all kinds of ostensible climate goals either being addressed or achieved. And yet, take a look at, you could pick up charging stations, rural broadband, $44 billion spent. So, Dylan, you're starting to sound like an abundance Democrat here who's saying, like, you can't just pass a bill with the money. You have to do stuff. You have to spend the money. You have to build things, and then you can crow about it.
I like to think of myself more as an FDR Democrat. They got it done very quickly during the Great Recession. I mean, we got ourselves pulled out because we put together public administration work so fast. I would also say that it is a stark reminder of the politics that we are in now. I don't necessarily just look at it as we need to build things. I should clarify, I don't necessarily just look at it as we need to build things to make sure voters know. I also look at it as Donald Trump is now trying to peel back the money that we have allocated in the Inflation Reduction Act. And we are now at a time where that is, they will pass it through reconciliation. They do not necessarily need Democratic votes. It will hurt the nation. It will hurt our climate goals. So when we have these ambitious programs, we need to understand that there is a possibility that we do not win the next presidential election and need to do everything we can to protect the goals and the accomplishments that we have from a Republican Party that will try and take it away from us.
So govern more effectively, and not saying build for the sake of building, but when you pass something, you better get it done and protect it, because the next administration, we're talking about impoundment, which is the president trying to block funding that Congress has authorized. And that's happened a number of times. Presidents don't win when that goes to court, but that doesn't mean that this one won't. I don't know. No more predictions from me about anything political ever. I'm the worst political pundit who has ever lived. But Dylan, so it just sounds like part of the point you're making is when you've got the moment to govern, you better govern, and you better accomplish what you seek to accomplish, because otherwise it'll get rolled back.
Yeah, and I think that's the impressive part about Democratic governors, especially in like the Midwest. You look at Gretchen Whitmer, you look at J.B. Pritzker, you look at Tony Evers in Wisconsin. I mean, Tony Evers just managed to get, 2,000 years of school funding, of extra school funding passed because he took advantage of the laws that they have and worked within the system to ensure that he can set up a future that Democrats can take advantage of and say, look at what we have done for you.
I see the phone ring, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to welcome your feedback, listeners, as we talk about the Democratic Party, how they emerge from these last 4 years, and what a future of leadership and priority should look like for a party that doesn't want to lose again, wants to win, wants to be effective, and wants to try to coalesce going forward. There's a lot of ideas about how to do that, and they do not all align. There's plenty of clashing ideas. So we're talking to Dylan Daylor, a Democratic political consultant, Nayeli Santiago, Vice President of the Monroe County Young Democrats. The phone number to call if you want to join the program toll-free is 844-295-TALK, 844-295-8255. 263-WXXI if you call from Rochester, 263-9994. You can email the program, connections@WXXI.org. Or if you're watching on the YouTube channel on WXXI News, you can join the chat there. So lots of ways to interact. Niles, is there, in your mind, a path that is opening up for your party that feels like the right one? I mean, whether that's leadership in the form of individuals, whether that's ideas that you think the party needs to coalesce around, or does it feel kind of murky right now?
I think there's a lot of people who are trying to put a face up top again. A lot of names have been thrown out there about who will be the face of the party. And I personally think that that's the wrong approach. We need to go back to being the party of the people. We need to go back to being that big tent. And
so how do you do it?
We need to talk about putting in people into leadership who are ready to hit the ground running, fresh faces, fresh ideas. I think that some of our tactics will need to be changing. I think that we really need to pivot back to grassroots organizing. I think that that's something that we really dropped the ball on last year. So much money was put into that campaign, and so much money went out to polling. And to hear that decisions were made where we intentionally we chose to do polling or to do something other than voter outreach, and then to know that we then lost those votes. When you go back and you have those conversations with people and you have those conversations with voters, it really does make an impact. Neighbor to neighbor, voter to voter, person to person. That has an impact on elections. And I think that we need to get back to doing that, and not just only during elections. We need to also make sure that we're doing the outreach during the times that they're not running, and we're keeping the community informed of what's going on. What are we getting done? How are we delivering? And that way, I hear this all the time. You only come knock on my door when it's election time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need to stop doing that, and we need to be in contact all the time. make the community feel like they have a line in to their leaders and their elected officials.
But don't many Americans say, I don't want to talk about politics all the time? Like, don't knock on my door and talk about politics. How do you knock on somebody's door and reach them and engage them, especially in a non-national election year, in a way that feels like, okay, they're going to keep the door open. They want to hear from me. I'm not just here as a box to check for them. They care about me.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few different ways. You can host town halls. When you go and knock on somebody's door, you see they got a dog. Hey, did you hear that we just opened up a new dog park? You know, that's something that we've done here in Monroe County. And finding the more one-on-one ways to do it, whether if it's you're talking about dog parks, you're talking about grocery shopping. You know, we have a lot of people that have kids. Let's talk about the playgrounds. What condition are the playgrounds in? Oh, you know, with town halls, if you do constituent surveys, that's something that I've seen some elected officials do. And then they don't just collect the results and then say, okay, I did this task. They then host town halls to discuss those results of that survey and see ways to navigate forward and how to best represent their constituency.
So connect the work to people's lives directly.
Yes.
Don't just say, are you registered in the Democratic Party? Are you going to be voting?
Yeah. It's more than that. And I think that going back to that person to person, that grassroots organizing really will make a difference and make people feel better connected and better represented by both the party and officials.
I'm going to ask Dylan the same question coming up here, but I got to clear a couple of phone calls here because we've got a bunch of emails coming in, and I want to make sure that we involve our listeners. Henry in Rochester first. Hello, Henry. Go ahead.
Hi. My question is to the Latino Caucus of Monroe County, New York State. Has it entertained the notion of a discussion strategically about the independence of Puerto Rico? Would you be leaning in any direction towards it, at least hypothetically, to this point?
So in these spaces, they're both the caucus in Monroe County and the one in the statewide. It's very, very fresh. One of the first things that we want to do is get to know what ideas people have. I know that personally, I'm Puerto Rican. This is something that I do think about often, and it's a hard issue to address. I think that the way that the government has really tied the hands of Puerto Rico's economy makes it really hard for us to be able to stand on our own feet if we were to get independence. I'm also not sure that becoming a state is also going to be what's best for the people in the island. And I can't speak to all the people that live in Puerto Rico because I'm not one of them. I've born and raised on the mainland in the States in New York. But I also know that statehood is not popular on the island, despite the votes. I know a lot of people, these votes happen every so often in Puerto Rico, and it is a common theme of people to not vote in protest. And so I think it's a discussion that we need to continue to have, but I also think that we need to continue to have the conversations about the way that Congress has been selling off the island to people and giving them tax breaks at the detriment to the community and the native Borinquen people. And we need to invest there. And we did that when we helped and put, the biggest investment under the Biden administration into Puerto Rico because of all the disaster relief and things like that. But we need to go farther, and we need to undo some of the damage that we've done.
Let me extend, Henry, thank you for the phone call. Let me extend on Henry's point and just ask you, Nilese. Did you ever expect to see Latino men vote in the way they did in this last election, especially under the age of 30? With Trump able to win certain categories of young voters and young men especially outright. Has that surprised you?
No.
No?
I did a lot of Latino studies in college, and we have seen that Latinos are moving right. And I think, and I've been saying this for years, the Democratic Party is going to continue to lose Latinos if we don't go to them and talk to them about what matters to them. People think that when they talk to Latinos about politics, they think that our number one issue is always going to be immigration. It's not. It usually falls around fifth. The number one issue is always going to be the economy. And then the Democratic Party's misunderstanding of the way that the Catholic Church and our religion ties into our culture and our politics is always going to leave us disconnected, because it's why that Latinos typically, if you look at the statistics, are not pro-choice. They're pro-life. It's because that we're so heavily connected to the Catholic Church and that belief. And so unless we learn how to talk to Latinos and also increase access of the Democratic Party to Latinos, we're going to continue to lose them.
Well, that's interesting. So can I ask you personally if you are where you are on the issue of abortion?
I'm pro-choice.
Okay, so how do you suggest talking to Latino voters who are opposed to abortion rights, and you want to do a better job as a party, reaching them, respecting that, and building that big tent? How do you talk to them?
I just recently had this conversation. I think that beyond just Latinos, but I think that I grew up in the Catholic Church. As a Latina, it was something we did. We went to Spanish Mass. And one of the ways that you do that is you go back to the core principles that I learned in the church. And I know that those principles of community service and public service and taking care of one another and always giving grace to people first, these are the principles that led me to choose to be a part of the Democratic Party. And we can connect on those values. The same way that I know that some people believe that that pregnancy begins at conception.
Life begins. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
life begins at conception.
Yeah.
I can be pro-choice for other women and be pro-life for myself, pro-birth for myself, and that is still a decision that you can make. It is making that choice to give people choices, and that's the way that I've always seen it. Is you can to be pro-choice does not mean that everybody needs to have abortions. It is that I love my neighbor enough that I will not put them in a position where they have to carry a birth that will kill them or will kill the fetus or will put them into hardship that they may never get out of.
Do you think your party loses people with the way it talks to people about abortion?
Yes. I think the way that we message a lot of things is why we lose people. It's more and more as politics get more polarizing, we make it very black and white, and these are not black and white issues. These issues are 50 shades of every color in the rainbow. And when we oversimplify them is when you alienate people. And it's okay to talk about the issues and the different stances that exist without leaving out the nuances or the exceptions, and so we need to stop oversimplifying some stuff, or we will continue to alienate some of our base.
All right, and thank you, Henry. In Naples, this is Andrew on the phone. Hey, Andrew, go ahead.
Hi, Evan. Calling to say that I listen to your program as much as I can.
Oh,
it's a great show. You do a great job. Calling to say that I'm a Democrat. I voted for Kamala Harris. And that I'm tired of hearing Biden blamed for the loss. I'm sorry to say that I believe that Kamala Harris was the wrong candidate to put up there. And my reasoning is to put a black woman against Trump, I think was where we lost.
Can you say a little bit more about that last part?
I can, because I know people who say, woman, no way, never. And a black woman, I would never vote for. I'm in Naples. I'm in the country. I'm in rural America. This is how people think. I'm in Trump country.
So you're saying pragmatically,
And,
just realistically right now, that wasn't happening?
Yes, I think that was absolutely the wrong candidate to put up against Trump.
Andrew, do you feel that way about a possible Pete Buttigieg candidacy in 2028 because he is a gay man?
I think that it depends partially who he's running against. But
Okay.
I think that's going to be questionable. And I would absolutely vote for Pete Buttigieg.
Okay.
But,
Wes Moore,
I
Maryland
don't
governor.
know that my neighbors will.
Wes Moore,
What's
Maryland governor, a black governor, Michigan Governor
black-
Gretchen Whitmer, a woman. You're saying that the party has to be very careful in who it chooses because of
That's my thinking.
not because of the way you feel, but the way you see others feel.
That's right. Absolutely not the way I feel.
Okay. Okay.
But I think that's what I'm surrounded by, and that's all over the country.
Okay. I'm going to ask both of our guests to weigh in. I'm going to start with Niley Santiago, a woman of color who's in the studio. We just heard Andrew say that realistically, he lives in Trump country. He doesn't think a woman of color was going to win that election.
I've heard that same sentiment. I mean, when Kamala first...
Joe Biden basically said that on The View.
Yeah.
To be fair, for the people who didn't see him on The View, he wasn't like, yeah, I'm not surprised Kamala didn't win, but I would have won. He was more like, I still think I would have beaten Trump, and I'm not surprised Vice President Harris didn't win because there's still a lot of bigotry in this country that's going to be hard for a black woman to overcome. That's what Joe Biden was saying. He wasn't saying she was a bad candidate.
Yes.
She had no chance. He was saying this country's still struggling with stuff. This is what Andrew's saying. What do you think?
So right around the time that Kamala had first announced, my algorithm obviously is tailored to me. And one of the first things that I noticed was a lot of the people saying that they couldn't support Kamala because she was a black woman, was a lot of black men. And a
lot of black men.
Yes. And it is something, I can't speak on a black woman's experience in life. I'm not a black woman. But it is something that I do see where it is hard for them to uplift black women. And I know that black women are a huge part of the success that the Democratic Party has had. And it breaks my heart every time that I hear this sentiment because they have done so much and have gotten so little credit for it. And so does it shock me that people have this? No, because yes, misogyny and racism is still alive and well in America. I experience it. She experienced it, and a lot of other women in our community will continue to experience it, not only in MAGA America, but also in urban areas or suburban areas, in bluer cities. And so it breaks my heart that people still have that mentality. But I also know that some of the anti-women rhetoric does come from what happened in 2016 with Hillary losing. When it comes to minority groups, when they fail, it does set us back in our ability to do it again. And it does taint the next person's run for it. And it sucks that the next person's going to have to pay for the last loser's mistake, but that is an experience that we have come to almost expect. And are always looking at ways to navigate through it. When people say that people of color, women, have to work harder, twice as hard, this is what they're talking about.
Dylan Daylor, what do you make of Andrew's points there?
I do think that Kamala could have won the election, and I look to data points that say that Kamala Harris did better among white people, that Kamala Harris did worse among people of color. It actually, in my mind, points to a level of racial depolarization in the country, not in terms of race relations, but in terms of voting patterns, that we are possibly leaving a time where Democrats can reliably count on voters of color to uphold our coalition, partially because we haven't delivered in the ways that we have promised. And I think that is something that a lot of people, if you go to organizers, would say that they heard on doors. But I do truly believe that Kamala Harris could have won that election. I mean, she had a nice boost after she was announced. I think that there were missteps that I think we all see. I think she would say that she made missteps. But I truly do believe if we had this debate between Biden and Trump, it went poorly, and he handed it over to Vice President Harris, and the economy was humming along, and we did not have inflation as an issue, and people were generally happy with the economy, I think she would have won.
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember, Trump did win the popular vote with a plurality, not a majority. It was still a very close election, 1.5 points total. He won all 7 quote-unquote swing states, but tight margins. such that on the morning of the election, it was a coin flip election. So to Andrew's point, I understand everyone who's on the political left is going to be wrestling with this in the years to come. But Dylan is right that something very interesting happened that's kind of counterintuitive, and we should probably keep mentioning this. Before I go to break, I'll reinforce the point that Dylan's making because it's factually correct. This country got less racially polarized along voting lines in this last election, not more. This country got more polarized along educational attainment lines. That's the biggest divide that is growing, is on, do you have a college degree? Do you have a 4-year degree? Do you have an associate's degree? Do you have a PhD? That is a better predictor of where your voting habits are going in this country than racial identity. Now, it doesn't mean that it was split. Black voters were split 50-50. Latino voters were split 50-50. It wasn't. That's not true. And there's still pretty big divides between men and women. That is true. But it's an educational attainment, to Dylan's point. And that's another issue that maybe on the other side of this break we should talk. Go ahead, Niley.
Yeah, I mean,
we need 2 hours for this.
It is when you touch on the differences along education lines. I think that this is, it's statistically shown that the more education you get, the more politically left you lean. That is, we typically tend to pull the college-educated folks in our party. I think that is also a reason why the Trump administration is going after the Department of Education. When that is their base, if they create more of their base, if they dismantle education, to them that's, I can dismantle a, not a pipeline, but a form of a pipeline to the Democratic Party. It cuts them off a little bit.
As we go to break, Mark writes to say, Evan, one of the things Biden said when running in 2020 was that he would be a bridge for a new and younger generation of Democrats to move forward. He did not do that. I believe ego and a bit of denial got in the way of him stepping aside. I think this is a through line for most of the older generation of politicians, no matter the party. David Hogg basically said recently the Democrats need to weed out the dead wood. And now the Democratic National Committee wants to vote David Hogg out of the committee. As much as the new generation wants to advance and bring forth new ideas, sometimes the old guard just won't let go. That's from Mark. Mark, thank you for the email. We're going to take our only break of the hour and come right back to your feedback on the other side.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Stephen writes, he says, regarding if we would have been better off if Trump had won in 2020, would we? He said, would Trump have figured out a way to subvert the 22nd Amendment and be on his third term now? I know he's talked about a possible third term in 2028, but I think his age will prevent that. But had he run in 2020, who knows where we would be now? Stephen, very fair. I do find it strange. I mean, you were talking about polling, all this emphasis that the Democratic Party does on polling instead of direct voter outreach. The polling right now, Trump can talk all he wants about a third term. He's extremely unpopular. Right now, I don't know. Again, I make no predictions. I'm a terrible prognosticator, and I'm a bad pundit. But he can talk all he wants about it. Given all the indicators right now, he's not anywhere close to being in a position to do anything historic and convince people to give him a third term. Long way to 2028. That's not what we're here for today. But I take Stephen's point that who knows? Again, it's a fool's errand to say what would have happened 4 years ago if Trump would have won. But it's an interesting question. Jillian in Irondequoit says, when I saw you were having young Dems on, my first reaction was, what do they know? They're too young. So it is with great relief I say thank you, young people, because with getting money out, soon things can get done. And she says, I think you're on the right track trying to get the money out, and says, during the last election, I rarely heard the campaign discuss what had been done. I would hear about them on other shows on NPR about the very real and many accomplishments of the Biden administration. So one question she has, do you think the Dems were too woke, and are they still too woke? Again, thank you, kids, from a grateful senior citizen in Irondequoit. Jillian in Irondequoit. All right, Jillian wants to know, Nilese, are the Democrats too woke? Were they, and are they?
when we talk about woke, what do we mean?
I know.
It is.
It's become this.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to say because Trump has made woke, this thing that it isn't. Than what it once was when it first came out back in 2016. I do think that some of the identity politics people are tired of. However, you cannot be so explicitly involved in identity politics while also uplifting and empowering other communities. And I think that we as a party need to find that balance. I think that it also comes with when we have more white folks talking about that, it comes off the wrong way sometimes. I call it white savior. And so I think that have people tell their stories, their own stories. And when you hear people tell their own stories in their own way, it's not identity politics. It's human to human. We have shared experiences. And I think that just handing out more microphones for people to tell their own story, I think will help in a way with some of the identity politics fatigue that I think a lot of people have.
I think Bob gives us a definition. To your point about what it means, like what do we mean when we say woke? Here's where Bob is, and with a question that I think relates to where my guess is where Jillian is. Bob says, I think many Democrats were hesitant to criticize Biden for fear of being seeming ageist. Have Democrats learned from that? Do they know how to criticize an older person without being ageist? Can they criticize a black person without being racist, an LGBTQ person without being homophobic? If they can't, then they run the risk of picking another weak candidate. I'm not trying to say those candidates would automatically be bad ones. Just the fear of being ableist, racist, homophobic keeps from asking important questions that would help sort out differences. So Bob is saying, don't just let identity determine who you vote for or don't vote for, or don't let identity prohibit you from analyzing whether a candidate is a good one or a bad one. That would be the definition in Bob's word of being too woke.
And I think what DEI actually is, what diversity, equity, and inclusion is letting a candidate of equal merit. And I think that people always forget that. And you will not be racist or homophobic or misogynistic if you do it based on their merits. Criticize them on their merits. Don't bring in their identity. If you can say this candidate isn't good because of X, Y, Z, and it is the actions that they've taken, the lack of credentials that they have, or because their credentials just don't fall within, the scope of what's needed for this job, that's okay. And we should continue to have those conversations. Absolutely. I don't believe that my identity, whether if it's me being a woman, me being a Latina, me being Puerto Rican, whatever the case may be, those aren't qualifications for me. Now, they do shape my perspective. They shape the way that I interact in the world, but they aren't qualifications. Because when you only see me for my identity, all the work that I've done over the past 23 years of my life, you just say that, well, it doesn't matter. It matters to me. When I stayed up all those late nights studying and all those papers that I wrote, it mattered to me. And so change the way that you also view people as more than just their identity. They are their merits and their qualifications too, and see the whole person. And this is, when people talk about, I'm colorblind, don't be colorblind. You need to see my color. You just need to see also beyond my color. And I think that is more of the conversations that we need to have.
Okay. To Jillian, Dylan, do you think the party is still stuck in whatever you would call wokeness?
You want my hot take for the hour, Evan?
Give it to us.
My hot take would be that I don't think I think that people associate wokeness with the farther left side of the party, but I think that if you looked at who was using the argument that we shouldn't criticize Biden, that we were going after his age, I don't think it was the far left side of the party. I think sometimes when certain elements of the party, and I won't say the center because I think we've kind of devolved more into a personality wars in politics. When the person that you like is being attacked, a lot of the times people will fall back onto the identity to defend them. And I think that is a problem. I do think that prevents us from having conversations, and it does stunt people up a little bit. But I don't think that we as a party are too woke, because I think that the Democratic Party has always been accused, the progressive party, because the Republicans used to have a progressive element, has always been accused of having radical ideas around social issues. I mean, before woke, there was critical race theory. Before critical race theory, there was, God, I'm blanking on the name of it. The PC police. That's what Bill Maher always complained of. Political correctness. Before political correctness, there was something before that. I mean, the Republicans have always tried to slander the Democrats, and the conservative wings have always tried to slander the progressive wings socially, because it is the thing that brings out the conservative side of any movement has to bring out disgust. That is what I believe the basis of their politics is. And they will always slander us that way, and I don't think that there's a way to avoid it. I think that there are ways to bring people into the larger tent, but I don't think that there's a way to stop a conservative element from slandering the more progressive, the more liberal element.
On YouTube, watching there, Sydney says many other countries have or have had female leaders, whether presidents or prime ministers. That this country, which claims to be so great and so advanced, is in reality so backward, is very dismaying. That's from Sydney. I mean, Dylan said earlier this hour, you think this country would elect a woman, a person of color? You think this country would? Do you think this country would right now? Nihilese.
There is the optimist in me and there's the pessimist in me. The pessimist in me is like, no. After seeing within our party, absolutely. We if it was only us, we would do it. But I am not sure, especially with the more and more every day in this country, things get more polarized, things get way more right, and the crazies are coming out. I'm not sure. I think I'm more likely to see another black president, maybe even a Latino president, potentially before I see a woman president.
Barb writing in agrees with that sentiment, says she thinks she likes Pete Buttigieg, thinks he'd have a hard time getting elected as a gay man. Adam in Naples says, great conversation today. I just wanted to chime in that I live in the Naples area and I'm absolutely not a Trump voter. This is a wonderful mix of political views, including artists, musicians, liberals, Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, Trumpers. I see Trump flags in Mendon and in Pittsford and in the city. It is a mix. We must stay away from stereotypes, as rural life does not imply misogyny and racism. That's simply carrying on stereotyping and other behavior that does not allow for the rapid advancement of equality. Thanks again for a great show. That is Adam in Naples. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate that. And before I go here, I got another text from a different Bob who said, come on, give us the list of who's supposed to be contenders. I've got a list of 12 from The Hill. But again, I told you, Bob, that's not what this hour is about. Bob's asking, who does The Hill say? So according to The Hill, the next Democratic nominee is one of the following: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, member of Congress; Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro; Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer; Maryland Governor Wes Moore; California Governor Gavin Newsom; Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker; former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg; former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel; ESPN sports commentator Stephen A. Smith; former VP Harris; former Minnesota Governor Tim Walz; Arizona Senator Ruben Gallego; Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. Stephen A. Smith, we're breaking some news here. That's going to be your nominee. How you with that? No, Nihilese. Since it's only 90 seconds, I'll ask you, and we didn't spend the whole hour on a horse race. Is anybody on that list? Do you go, oh my gosh, I hope so? I hope it's this person.
I got to see how they handle the next year or two first.
Too early for you to get there.
Yeah. Everything's rapidly changing very quickly, and I need to know how you're able to roll with the punches and pivot and put together a team. Because there's one thing, we're going to need a competent team to undo all the damage and fix things up when this presidency is over.
If your party nominates Stephen A. Smith, I will think that we really are living in a simulation. That's it. We're living in a simulation.
You and me both, maybe.
Okay. Hey, I would say stranger things have happened. Very strange things have happened. So that's, who knows? Dylan Daler, anybody on this list make you go, yes?
Yeah, I think that most of them make me go yes. I think apart from maybe a couple, specifically Stephen A. Smith, I would probably drop everything that I was doing the same way I did for Vice President Harris and go and help. I mean, Democrats have to win the next election. I would do anything in my power to make that happen.
But it's a pretty wide-ranging list there. I mean, Josh Shapiro is pretty far apart from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't share every I did not believe in every single opinion that the Harris campaign had. It's just that I believe that what we're seeing now was so much worse. And it's so much scarier, and it is so much more harmful to this country that I would rather see a Democrat of almost any stripe.
So you're an optimist with that list.
I am an optimist.
But is there someone not on this list that's going to be? See, that's another day. That's another day.
Whole other hour.
And the answer is, by the way, probably yes. There's probably it's a much bigger list than even the Hill came up with. So, Bob, I hope that answered that question. I want to thank our guests for sharing their insight this hour. Dylan Daler, a Democratic political consultant. Thank you for being back with us here.
Thank you for having me.
Nayeli Santiago, Vice President of the Monroe County Young Democrats. Thank you for being here as well.
Thanks, Evan.
More connections coming up in a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from GreenSpark Solar, serving the greater Rochester and Finger Lakes regions for over 20 years. GreenSpark Solar is dedicated to helping people power their homes and businesses with local solar power and battery storage backup. More at greensparksolar.com.